5 cruise lines just pulled out of the Arabian Gulf. Hotels ranked dead last. That was dead last in AI readiness. And then Choice Hotels went and deployed enterprise-wide AI across their operations. Amtrak is about to place the biggest train order in history, and the White House wants to cut rail funding by 82%. Boeing just posted a record $695 billion backlog, and 43% of travelers globally now say they're actively avoiding overcrowded destinations. Episode 1 sparked the action. This week brought the explosive results. This is the world where travel meets technology. Welcome back to Cabins to Clouds. I'm Eric Stoltz, and this is episode 2. If you got the pilot last week, thanks for coming back. If you're new here, then welcome aboard. You picked a great week to start, because this is one of those weeks where every single sector dropped a massive story that made me stop scrolling and start digging into the information. We've got a geopolitical fallout in cruising. We've got a $1 billion bet by one of the biggest hotel brands in America. A wake-up call for all the other hotel tech leaders. A massive fight over America's rail future. A philosophical question about whether or not the OTA industry, as we know it, is about to disappear. So with all of that, let's get into it. If I had to put a label on this week, it would be the readiness gap. Across every sector, cruise, hotel, rail, aviation, tourism, the story wasn't whether technology and changes are coming, they're already here. The story is about who's actually ready. Hotels have the worst AI readiness score of any major industry. Amtrak's rolling stock is pushing 50 years old. Airlines are debating whether or not their distribution standards even matter anymore in the AI first world, and travelers themselves are voting with their feet, quietly choosing destinations that are quieter because popular ones can't handle the load. Readiness, that's the thread. And by the way, if you caught last week's pilot, you'll remember that our biggest takeaway was that AI is moving from feature to infrastructure, but data integration is the bottleneck. This week, we're going to see that theme evolve. The bottleneck isn't just data anymore, it's the entire organization. Readiness is the sequel to integration. And let's jump into that first segment and pull the thread. So let's start with the big one. 5 major cruise brands, TUI, MSC, Europa, Costa, and AIDA, have now officially canceled their 2026-2027 winter season in the Arabian Gulf. That's not a minor schedule tweak. This is a full regional withdrawal. TUI pulled its largest ship, the Main Chef Flow, 4,000 passengers, and repositioned it to Northern Europe. MSC moved the World Europa, their LNG-powered flagship, to the Southern Caribbean. Costa shifted Esmeralda to the Canary Islands, and AIDA sent the AIDA Prima to Northern Europe. The official language across all of these announcements was something like giving the guests certainty, but what that's really saying is the calculated risk doesn't work. When you're putting 3,000 to 4,000 passengers on a floating city, the tolerance for geopolitical uncertainty is basically zero. In our pilot, we covered that 37 million cruise passengers last year made it a record-breaking year, and said that the cruise industry is a leading indicator for regional stability. We also watched every major CEO at Seatrade talk about AI and destination-driven differentiation. Well, 1 week later, here we are, the stability indicator flashing red. This proves the thesis. On the flip side, North American ports are having a moment. Montreal opened up its 2026 season, expecting nearly 50,000 passengers across 39 operations, with luxury ships called up to 222% since 2019. Crystal Cruise is returning from a 7-year absence. Port Milwaukee is projecting a record-breaking 64 cruise vessel calls. That's up from something like 23 last year. American Cruise Lines is launching its Great Lakes service with the American Patriot. The takeaway, the cruise industry isn't shrinking, it's migrating. Capital and capacity are flowing to more stable, predictable markets. And here's a long-term signal for that. Princess Cruises announced 3 new ships for 2035, 2038, and 2039. Each comes in at 183,000 gross tons with capacity for 4,700 guests. These are the biggest ships Princess has ever built. This is a bet on the next decade. The industry's order book now sits at 79 ships worth $80 billion. This is where the cruise line industry is going. All right, so as we move into the hospitality industry, I found 3 really interesting stories that I thought were interesting and that are really telling the state of the industry. We've got a story around AI readiness, AI integration moving beyond pilot state, and then Choice Hotels going all in. All right, let me say this. This is the deep dive this week. And honestly, this one's a little personal for me because it sits right in the intersection between what I do for a living and what I'm obsessed with as a travel entrepreneur. A new report from Resume Now, based on Lightcast's workforce risk outlook data, just ranked every major industry by AI workforce preparedness. In hospitality, dead last. A score of 4.02, worse than healthcare, worse than the financial services industry, worse than every other section that they measured. Now, here's what most people are going to take away from that headline. Hotels are behind on AI. But that's the surface level read. Let me give you more of an architectural read. That's the one that actually matters. The real risk in 2026 isn't that AI is going to eliminate hotel jobs. It's that AI deployments are going to fail because the workforce hasn't been architected to support them. And yes, I use that deliberately, architected, because this is a systems design problem, not a trading problem. Think about it in the way of a cloud transformation, which I do day in and day out. We have a concept called technical debt. That's the accumulation of costs and shortcuts and outdated systems that slow you down. What hospitality has right now is what I'd like to call training debt. Every dollar you spend on an AI license or AI tool, your dynamic pricing engine, your autonomous concierge, your predictive housekeeping system, you need a corresponding investment in the humans that operate alongside it. And the data says that this investment is not happening. The report identifies 3 failure patterns, and every one of them map to what I've seen in enterprise cloud migrations as well. First, the human friction gap. Agentic systems, or AI systems, the ones that don't just recommend actions, but actually follow through and execute them autonomously, like a booking distribution reservation or managing a guest recovery workflow. Those systems are being deployed faster than the staff can be trained on them to oversee them. That's like spinning up a Kubernetes cluster and handing a dashboard to someone who's never seen a container. It's just not going to work. Second is the operational drag from underutilization. When a staff doesn't understand a new tool, they either ignore it or work around it. In enterprise IT, we call this shadow IT. In the hospitality, it's shadow service. The front desk agent who's bypassing the AI concierge because they don't trust it or they don't want to work with it is creating an inconsistent experience for that guest and wasting every dollar that you spent on that platform. Third is the turnover amplification. Workers who feel overwhelmed by new AI tools and new technology are more likely to leave. In an industry already behind and can't keep up and hire fast enough, that's a death spiral. You deploy AI to solve labor shortages, but the deployment makes the shortage worse. So what's the answer? There's 3 things that every hotel tech leader should be asking right now. First one, is your training spend scaling with your tech spend? If you're spending 6 figures on AI licensing and tools and 4 figures on digital literacy, your implementation is going to fail. Number 2, are your interfaces low-code enough? Given that the readiness score, the software you deploy needs to be dramatically simpler. It needs to have simpler UIs. That's the best let me take it back to what I've seen in my job. The best software that I've seen doesn't require training because the design is the training. So the third one, and this is the one that really kind of excites me, can AI solve its own readiness gap? Can you deploy AI co-pilots with your staff-facing platforms that provide real-time, on-the-job coaching? Imagine this. Imagine your housekeeping management app, and the AI just doesn't assign rooms and tell you which rooms to clean, but it walks a new hire through the process end to end, step by step, in their language at their pace. This is an unlocking mechanism for organizations. So when we look at the move of AI and we look at how it's moving through the industry, here's the context, and here's why it matters right now. Hotels globally are accelerating AI adoption from experimental pilots to full-scale integration. We're seeing AI-enabled cameras for housekeeping. We're seeing that trickle service alerts. We're seeing voice-based systems that have eliminated traditional reception desks at some properties. Dynamic pricing engines are monitoring competitors' rates in real time and adjusting your rates at your hotel for every distribution channel simultaneously. The technology is moving at a production space and a production speed. The workforce is moving at a training speed. The gap, the readiness gap, is the defining challenge for hotel technology in 2026. Now, let's look at a positive story in this space. Choice Hotels is going all in. They're the first U.S. hospitality provider on AWS Agent Core. Now, readiness has been the thread, so let's really kind of dig into that. Because while the industry average sits at dead last, one company, just made a huge move that shows it's closing the gap and what that gap actually looks like. 5 days ago, or around April 20th, Choice Hotels International announced full enterprise-wide AI deployment in partnership with AWS Web Services, or AWS or Amazon Web Services. They didn't just buy a chatbot or bolt on a pricing tool. They became the first U.S. hospitality provider to standardize on AWS Agent Core, which is an enterprise platform that provides secure, reliable foundations for intelligent agents that can retrieve trusted information and automate workflows at scale. Let me translate that from the press release to what it actually means. Choice Hotels has embedded AI across the hospitality value chain. This is from how a guest discovers and books a hotel, to how the franchisees manage day-to-day operations, to how the company optimizes its distribution and channel ecosystems. Revenue management, maintenance, guest communications, all of it running through an AI-powered layer. Their CEO, Brian Kirkland, called it the next chapter in Choice Hotels' history of innovation. The AWS VP, Rich Guerrero, said, Choice is a powerful example of what it looks like when enterprise truly commit to AI at scale. Here's why that matters. In this context, everything we've talked about, the industry scored a 4.2 in AI readiness. Choice Hotels just demonstrated what it looks like to score a 10. They didn't just announce a pilot. They didn't just announce a single use case. They moved AI from experimental to production-grade deployments across the entire enterprise. And remember, last week we talked about Muse, founders saying that hotels are making the wrong AI bets. They're focusing on marketing funnel. Choice Hotels just proved his point by doing the exact opposite, embedding AI into operations, distribution, and the full guest journey. That sounds like the right bet to me. The question for every other hotel brand in 2026 is simple. Are you going to be Choice Hotels, or are you going to be part of the 4.02%? All right, let's talk trains. Amtrak did drop one of the biggest ones this week. They've officially issued a formal request for suppliers to bid on the largest long-distance fleet replacement contract in the company's history. We're talking more than 800 new rail cars across 14 routes. Many of the current cars are like 50 years old. We talked about that last week. The plan standardizes everything to a single level fleet, no mixed bi-level or single level equipment, which broadens competition among manufacturers, reduces maintenance complexity, and improves the passenger's experience across the entire national network. They're expected to announce a supplier by the end of 2027 with first delivery in the early 2030s. It isn't happening in isolation. 79 of 125 new ALC 42 locomotives have been delivered. Next Gen Acela launched last fall, and new Aero fleets support cascading services this year. Amtrak is generally modernizing their rail industry. But that brings a funding paradox. We have $4.7 billion investment versus an 82% budget cut. But here's the tension. The same week Amtrak opened up this bid for 800 new cars, the Trump administration proposed a fiscal 2027 budget that would slash passenger rail funding by 82%. That's $13 billion compared to 2026 levels. Amtrak funding specifically cut by 13.5%. High-speed rail funding cut zeroed out entirely. Yet simultaneously, the Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy announced $4.7 billion for Northeast Corridor projects, including Penn Station, Union Station renovations, funded through the 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Job Acts. The Rail Passengers Association called the budget cuts a dramatic step backwards in just as states are starting to deliver new services and responding to unprecedented demand. Meanwhile, Amtrak is suing MTA because the Metro North has been blocking non-revenue train movement on the Hudson and New Haven lines since March, including movement of the new Osceola train sets. Federal regulations require track geometry cars running every 2 weeks for high-speed certification. The political American rail in 2026 is, let's just say, it's a little complicated. So let's jump into the airline industry. I pulled two stories this week. First is going to be about Boeing, and the second is going to be about North Atlantic. So when we started to look at Boeing actually reported first quarter 2026 results this week, and the headline is momentum. Revenue hit $22.2 billion, up from 14% year over year. They delivered 143 commercial aircrafts, including 114 737s and 15 787 Dreamliners. For the first time since roughly 2019, Boeing has outpaced Airbus in quarterly deliveries. The backlog grew to a record $695 billion. That's billion with a B, across more than 6,100 commercial aircrafts. The 737 program is running at 42 per month, and a fourth production line coming on this summer in Renton. They're still cash flow negative. They're about 1.5 billion negative in cash flow, and that's a dramatic improvement from the last time when it was negative 2.3 billion a year ago. CEO Kelly Octoberg called it building momentum. The market seems to agree, and the 787 is having kind of a moment globally right now. Eli confirmed that 1 $8.5 billion order for 6 additional Dreamliners. Ethiopia Airlines converted 6 options into firm orders, growing what already is Africa's largest 787 fleet. It's not all good news. So North Atlantic is the low-cost long-haul carrier. And this one's a little less optimistic because as they have been the budget long-haul carrier, they've dropped all of their routes out of Los Angeles. 12 weekly flights across Gatwick, Paris, and Rome, and cut all of their summer schedule to just 5 routes. They've announced a new strategic review, which is corporate speak for putting yourself up for sale. A fully underwritten $110 million rights issue keeps the lights on, but elevated fuel costs and low-cost long-haul model remain a brutal combination for North Atlantic. So this week in travel agents and OTA, we get into a new debate of AI agents versus the browser. Who controls the booking layer? This week, a panel at Web in Travel featuring executives from Booking.com, TravelStar, WeGo, surfaced a question that should keep every OTA executive up at night. Does the browser, and by extension, the traditional OTA interface, even survive in an agent world? The consensus was striking. The browser may eventually disappear, and the discovery layer, what replaces it? Is it some form of AI agent? And the real question becomes, who controls the infrastructure underneath? TravelStar's CEO framed it pretty good. In the values in the plumbing, the payments, the supplier connectivity, customer service, whoever owns that layer owns the relationship. However, Booking.com's Alberto Yates pushed back and said, arguing that AI accelerates the OTA rather than threatens it. The job of stitching together accommodations and flights and transfers, attractions into a coherent journey, that remains relevant regardless of who it sits on top of. Meanwhile, in the world of standards, TP connects integrations, MCP protocol, or Model Context Protocol, into its NDC platform this month, creating what they're calling a universal adapter layer for the different NDC versions. If you remember from our first episode, we talked about NDC as being this common language or common pattern as the airline industry's attempt to modernize distribution. Now, AI is going to sit on top of it, and some executives are asking whether or not that standard even matters anymore when AI can handle the complexity of the whole situation. So let's move into tourism as we start to look at tourism. Is the over-tourism tipping point actually hitting? Travelers are starting to vote with their feet. Booking.com released its 11th annual travel and sustainability report this week, surveying that 32,500 travelers across 35 markets, and the data is clear. Over-tourism isn't just a policy concern anymore. It's actively reshaping consumer behavior. 43% of travelers globally are now saying that they plan to avoid overcrowded tourist destinations in 2026. That's up 11% from last year. 42% plan to travel outside of peak seasons. 25% are actively seeking destinations with cooler temperatures as climate change is making traditional hotspots even more uncomfortably warm. And there's a generational split happening too. 36% of boomers are planning to travel off-peak season versus just 36% of Gen Zers. The older travelers are actually changing behavior, not just expressing concern now. Meanwhile, Destination.com published a new over-tourism risk index ranking 30 destinations by pressure. Venice scored 96 out of 100, 30 million annual visitors against 50,000 historic center residents. Dubrovnik hit 94. Santorini, hit 92. These aren't just tourist destinations anymore. They're case studies for infrastructure failure. All right, here's the big takeaway this week. It comes back to that word I used in the top: readiness. Every story that we covered today, every single one, is fundamentally about the gap between what's possible and what's prepared. Hotels have access to agentic systems that can autonomously manage guest recovery and guest experience and provide dynamic pricing, but they have the least prepared workforce of any industry to actually run it. Amtrak has a vision of 800 modern rail cars and a genuine fleet renaissance, but the proposed federal budgets would gut that before it even makes it happen. The cruise industry can build ships worth $80 billion, but an entire region, can become off limits overnight due to geopolitical risk. OTAs might be replaced by AI agents, but who's actually building the plumbing that makes this whole thing work? And travelers, they want to avoid over tourism, but the destinations that need relief the most don't have the infrastructure to redirect those individuals or those flows of people. Here's what I've learned in 24 years of technology transformation: technology doesn't fail because it doesn't work. Technology fails because organizations aren't ready for it. The tools that are never the bottleneck, readiness is. If you're in a travel industry, whether you're running a hotel, managing an OTA, operating a cruise liner, or planning destinations, the questions for 2026 isn't which technology should I adopt? It's, is my organization actually ready for the technologies that I already have? That's the gap. Close it first. So that wraps up the show for the week. Thank you for spending your time with me today. I genuinely appreciate it. Every single one of you who tune in, thank you. If this episode gave you something to think about, do me a favor, hit subscribe button, drop a like, leave a comment telling me which story hit the hardest for you. Was it the AI awakening in the hotels? Was it the Amtrak's paradox? Or was it the existential crisis that the OTAs are going through right now? I want to hear about it. Again, my name is Eric Stoltz. This has been Cabins and Clouds. Now, go enjoy the trip.